Hello everyone, welcome back to AWS tutorial series. So in the previous video, we learned about AWS global infrastructure, including regions, availability zones, and edge location. Today, we are going to learn one of the most important AWS services, that is IAM or Identity and Access Management. IAM controls who can access AWS resource and what they are allowed to do. By the end of this video, you will understand IAM users, group rules, policy permissions, and MFA. What is IAM? IAM stands for Identity and Access Management. It is an AWS service that helps us to control access to the AWS resources. For example, we might want one employee to create EC2 instances, while another employee should only be able to view resources. IAM allows us to define these permissions. The basic question IAM answer is who can access what and what can they do. So the four concepts you should remember when learning IAM: users, groups, policies, and permissions. Another very important concept is IAM roles. To understand each these with a practical example. So coming to the IAM user, IAM user generally represents an individual identity that needs to interact with AWS. For example, suppose a company has a developer named Rahul. We can create IAM user for Rahul and give him only the permission he needs. A user can have console access and when appropriate programmatic access to the credentials such as access keys. An IAM group is a collection of IAM users. Suppose we have 20 developers. Instead of attaching the same policies individual to every user, we can put the users into the developers group and attach the appropriate policies to that group. This makes permission management easier. Now let us see difference between the user and group. A user represents the individual identity. A group is the collection of user. For example, Rahul is a user, developers is a group. Rahul can belong to the developer group. Now coming to the IAM policy, let's talk about important concept. An IAM policy is a document that defines permissions. It tells AWS what actions are allowed or denied on a particular resources. For example, this policy allows a user to perform the S3 get object action. IAM policy is normally written in a JSON format. The most important element of the IAM policy are effects, actions, resource, and conditions. Effect can specify yellow ordinary action specifies what operation can be performed. Resources specifies which AWS resources the permission applies to. Condition can be used to apply additional restriction. Now we come to the IAM roles. A role is different from a normal IAM user. A role provides permission that user can be assumed by the trusted identity or services. One of the most common example is EC2 instance accessing on a S3 bucket. Instead of putting a long-term AWS access keys inside the application, we can attach an IAM role to the EC2 instance. Now let us see the difference between the user and role. This is very common interview question. IAM user is usually represents a person or application identity. An IAM role is designed to be assumed and provides temporary credentials. For AWS workloads such as EC2, Lambda, and other services, using roles is generally preferred over embedding long-term access keys. Let us take a real-time example. Suppose we have a Spring Boot application running on EC2. The application needs to be upload files on a S3 bucket. We can create an IAM role with the required S3 permission and attach the role to the EC2 instance. The application can then access S3 through the role without storing long-term AWS credential inside the application. So let us see what is authentication and authorization. The two most important security concepts are authentication and authorization. Authentication means who are you. Authorization means who are you allowed to do. What are you allowed to do? IAM helps with the identity and access control. So understanding this distinction is important. AWS resources can be accessed in different ways. For example, the user can work through the AWS Management Console. Developers can use AWS CLI or AWS SDKs. Application and service commonly use temporary credential obtained through the IAM rules. Now coming to the MFA. MFA stands for multi-factor authentication. Instead of relying on only password, MFA adds another authentication factor. This provides additional layer of security. For important AWS accounts, MFA is a very important security practice. One of the most important IAM security principle is the least privilege. It means giving users or applications only the permissions they actually need. For example, if an application only needs to read object from S3, we shouldn't give it a full S3 administrator permission. This reduces the potential impact of accidental or unauthorized actions. AWS provides a different policy mechanism. Identity-based policies are attached to the identities such as users, group or roles. Resource-based policies are attached to the supported resources. There are also advanced controls such as permission, boundaries, and AWS organization service control policies. For beginners, focus first on identity-based and resource-based policies. Let's look at some of the important IAM best practices. Avoid using AWS root user for everyday activities. Use the MFA. Follow the principle of least privilege. For application running on AWS services, prefer IAM rules rather than the embedding long-term credentials. And regularly review permissions and account activity. Now, let us say difference between a root user and IAM user. When you create a AWS account, you have a root user. The root user has a very broad privileges and should be protected carefully. For everyday task, AWS recommendation using a appropriate IAM identifiers rather than using a root user routinely. This diagram summarizes how IAM can be used in a real-world environment. Human users can be managed through users, groups, and policies. AWS workloads such as EC2 can use roles to access other AWS services. This separation makes our AWS environment more secure and manageable. These are the common IAM interview questions. Make sure you understand the difference between the user, group, policies, and role because these are frequently discussed in the interviews. Let us summarize today's lesson. IAM help us to securely manage access to AWS resources. Users represent identities. Groups organizes users. Policies define permissions. Roles provide assumable permission, especially useful for AWS service and application. MFA add additional security and least privilege help us to avoid unnecessary access. In next video, we learn about the practical demonstration of IAM. If you found this video helpful, please like, share, subscribe to my channel. Thank you for watching.